This is Meredith from the Papery Craftery. Today I'm going to be sharing a fun way to do a gift for someone you love. I had it on my blog for a while, and it is what I called a botanical heart with flowers and vines. So it's a great way to practice your on-edge quilling, which is quilling that you're using as a straight line to maybe do an outline or something like that. A lot of people do this technique when they're making monograms. So I'm going to show you how I do that. And it also has two different types of sort of abstracted flowers, not your traditional type of flowers. They look a little bit different, but it's a couple of fun techniques just to have in your back pocket. So I hope you enjoy this botanical heart with vines and flowers. For the supplies for this heart, I'm going to be using a few different types of quilling paper. For the main body of the heart is Leaf Green by Craft Harbor Paper. It is, I think, by far my favorite green for plants. I'm also using a pale lavender from Paplin Paper called Orchid. And I also have Bright White from Craft Harbor and Quilled Creations Black. I'm also sharing a heart template that I used for this project. I will link to the blog post below where you can find that. There's two different size hearts, my quilling workboard, and some wax paper, two different scissors. You don't really need this small pair of scissors, but it might come in handy later. I also have a quilling needle tool, some white glue in a squeeze bottle, and some straight pins. The first thing you need to do is to set up your workboard with your template. So after you've printed out the heart template that you want to use, or you can always just draw your own, you're going to cut that out so that it can fit on your workboard. Lay that down right over the cork, and then on top of the template, you're going to lay down your piece of wax paper. And that is what's going to help your quilling not stick to your template later on. Use your straight pins to tack down all four corners of your wax paper all the way through to your cork board. You want to make sure that your wax paper is as tight as you can get. You don't really want any big wrinkles or anything right in the middle. This looks pretty good. It's not super flat, but it will do. And you can go ahead and put this aside for now, because the first thing we're going to be doing is making the outline of the heart. But we have to first double up the paper to make it thick enough to hold up against the outline. So what we're going to be doing is something called on-edge quilling, which is when we use paper to stand on its edge and outline things. Standard store-bought quilling paper doesn't tend to be sturdy enough to do this without wrinkling. And some people make their own paper for this, or they use a thicker cardstock. I try not to have a ton of paper lying around that I'm not using or that I only use sometimes. So what I do is make a double thickness of paper to use on my on-edge quilling. So to start, I am folding this it's either 22 or 24 inch leaf green in half, right in the center. And on one half, right where it folded, I'm going to start laying down glue all the way from that middle fold to the very end. I'm using my needle nose container of glue, and I'm getting a very, very thin line all the way, like I said, from the middle fold to the end. I don't want to skip any spots or leave any gaps in the glue. It might seem like it's a lot, but what I found is when you leave a little tiny gap in the glue, you end up getting a bubble in our next step. So just make sure you take the time. It feels sort of silly, but it will end up working really well. Get that little strip of glue from end to end. After you have your glue all the way to the end, you're going to want to very carefully, this might take some practice, line up the paper, fold it at where you folded it from the beginning, line it all up, and I sort of pull it through my fingers to flatten it all the way to the end. And then I just keep going one side and I flip it over and I smush it again the other side. I do this a few times on each side, flipping it back and forth to prevent any little air bubbles or any little gaps in the paper. And I've been doing this for a really long time. When it's all dry, which only takes a few minutes, between the double thickness of paper and the glue, it makes it so that you can use standard quilling sheets for your on-edge quilling pretty easily. After your double thickness of paper has dried, you can see it's definitely a little bit thicker now and a little bit stronger, a little bit sturdier. So it's going to hold up nicely. Tear one edge off, because it's always nice to start with a torn edge on quilling paper. We're going to start wrapping this strip around the edge of our heart. To do this, I like to kind of curve the strip between my fingernails to start, just to give it the basic shape. Add a tiny drop of glue to the center of the heart, and I'm going to use some pins on either side just to keep this in place. Now the goal is to use as little glue as possible, but you're going to want to have some on there to anchor it here and there. If you have a small paintbrush, you can use that to wipe away some of the glue. And after that sets for just a minute, I'm going to start adding dots of glue a little ways apart around the heart. Again, just to sort of anchor my quilling strip in place. I'm not looking to glue the entire line of the heart. I just want a couple dots here and there so that between the glue and the pins, it will just keep my paper in place enough so that it's along the shape of the outline of the heart. There may be some questions about where exactly you need to put your pins. Some of this goes by feel. You can sort of see which way the paper is pulling. If it's pulling to the outside and you need it to curve in, you would use pins that way. If you had it leaning towards the outside and you want it to go in, you would put it on the outside. It's sort of something you have to play around with. I am in the belief that pins are okay. You can use pins. If you see here in the corner, to get the sharp angle at the corner, I put a pin right there and sort of pinch my strip around it, and it's going to give it a real sharp corner. I know there's some quillers out there who don't really like using pins that much. I find them really useful, especially for things like this when you need to keep your paper in shape. I just think that they're really helpful. It'll make you a little bit less crazy. So go ahead and use your straight pins. It will be okay. So at this point, I realized that some of my heart was moving in ways I didn't want it to move when I let go. So that's why I put another pin on the outside here. This goes back to what I was saying about using the pins by feel. If your paper starts moving away you don't want to, prop it up with a pin or two, and that will get it to stand exactly where you need. And I also have run out of my first doubled up strip to make the entire edge, so I did end up having to make another one. And I just tore the end to make it have a smooth starting point, shaped a little bit with my finger to sort of get the same angle as my template, and measured it, tore off some to make it the right length, added a little bit of glue and pins, and then I did need to trim it a little bit with some small scissors when I got to the end. but it's okay if your paper's not long enough. You can definitely make a little bit of an extra piece to add it in if you need to. Again, if you have a small paintbrush handy, go ahead and wipe around the edge of your heart to get some of those gluey dots away. This again isn't really super necessary, but it'll help later with cleanup. Now I'm going to make two different types of flowers. These are not your usual flowers. These are more of like an abstracted sort of flower, just to try something different. So with the orchid paper, I'm going to be using strips that are between 4 and 6 inches, and I'm going to roll them up on my needle tool from end to end, and then once it's all rolled, take it off and let it open up a bit. And once the coil has stopped moving, I'll go ahead and glue the end to secure it. And from here, I'm going to use my needle tool to push in one side. And then I'm going to sort of pull it back out again. My goal for these flowers is to make them look like sort of abstract roses. So they have the idea of a bunch of flower petals going around and around in a circle, but they're not completely perfect. Just another fun way to make a flower with paper. The second abstracted flower is going to be made using black and white quilling paper strips. So first I'm going to make the center of the flower, and that's going to be made from about 1 inch of the black. I'm going to roll it around the needle tool, making a tight coil, which means that you're going to glue the end without letting it unravel at all. Again, it's also known as a peg. So just a little bit of glue. It's easy if it's still on the tool, and you can just roll it all the way to the end, back and forth to seal it a couple times, and that is going to be the middle of your flower. Now for the rest of it, I'm going to be using, these flowers all are going to be different sizes. So again, anywhere between 4 and 6 inches, just to give some variation to your flowers. Right on the peg while it's still on the needle tool, glue the end of the white, and then you can roll that right around the black. So twist that all up, and then that one you can pull off the tool and let open up a little bit. And once that has settled, you can glue the end, and that is your black and white flower. And I think these sort of look like, I think you pronounce it anemone flowers, or like big graphic black and white flowers. They're really pretty, but it's just a nice change against that lavender color. And then for both of these flowers, you're going to just make a whole mess of them. I don't have a number exactly for how many you're going to use for your heart, but I think this is about maybe 20, 25 of each or so. And then I also make some white and lavender tight coils or pegs that I'm going to be using on parts of this heart, because it's going to sort of look like a cascade of flowers. Once you're ready to put your flowers on, you can go ahead and remove the pins from your heart. And some of them will come right out easily. Some of them you might need to give a little twist to, but they should all come out, and your heart should, at this point, stay in place just fine. And now I'm going to go ahead and show you how to put on your flowers. And like I said before, I'm going for sort of a cascade of flowers, and I'm going to mix up the two different types. There's no real rhyme or reason to this except that I'm looking for them to sort of just go on one side and go from thin to thicker and then back to thin again. So I'm going to start with small, maybe just the little pegs there, and go around most of this half of the heart. I'm not going to do exact, but most of it. So I try to find some of the bigger ones, and I'm going to put them in the middle. And this is just going to be sort of playing with the flowers. So what I like to do is put some on either side of the heart and then do sort of another row on top, but I don't want it to sit flat, so I like to kind of angle them. And the first time I made this heart, I had them all laid out, and I actually took a picture of it once I was happy, and that way I sort of had a reference of what I was going for once I was happy with the layout. But this time I'm sort of just jumping in, doing a little bit at a time, and using my bottle to glue it down. Either one is fine. It really doesn't take that much time to plan it and get it the way you want. But again, if you do that, just so you have exactly the same thing, I would go ahead and just take a quick picture with your smartphone or whatever, and then you'll know exactly how to replicate it. Just wanted to take a minute to show that I'm going to start mapping out where I want my flowers to start and end. So I put those real small pegs sort of as a beginning and an end point. So I know that that's as large as I want my flower cascade to go. And I'm not going to go past those little small tight coils. So that's up to you. It's just easier for my brain to know, don't go overboard. This is where you want to stop. And then I just keep adding until I'm happy with the way that the flowers look. So at this point, I have the flowers all glued, and they're exactly the way I'd like them to be. They start small towards the top, get a little bit wider, get a little fuller, and then when it gets back down to the bottom of the heart, you can see that the smallest flowers are at the end again. Get everything else out of the way, have the extras, that's great. Make sure everything is glued exactly the way it needs to be. And then the next step is going to be filling in the rest of the heart with the vines. And I'll show you how to do that now. I'm going back to the same green that I used for the outline of the heart. And this time I don't need to double it up. This is just going to be one single strip of the leaf green paper. I'm going to tear that into about an inch strips, more or less. There's no exact measurement here, just sort of eyeball an inch. And what I'm going to be doing is just making some really loose scrolls. And to make a scroll, you're going to do a similar move as you do to making a coil, but instead of wrapping it all the way and gluing the end, you're going to spin it on your tool to curl most of it and then kind of straighten out that tail so it looks like a scroll. And again, you're going to need a whole mess of these. I would go ahead and do them in different sizes, some a little bit larger, some a little bit smaller, some that have a larger eye on their scroll, and some that are a little tighter. And you're going to be filling in the rest of the heart where there are not any flowers. So I usually start at the top and then go from there. You can do this a couple of ways if you want to dip the tail of the scroll in some glue, you can do that. I'm using my needle nose bottle, but I just put a little bit of glue right on the tail of the scroll, and for the beginning I sort of tuck it right underneath the smallest coils. And I also like to use pins for this as well. I think it really keeps the scrolls exactly where you want them. So this is another sort of thing you can just play with. If you have some tweezers, that would be helpful at this point, so you don't have to get glue on your fingers every time. But just put some glue on, tuck it in, and I think it's a good idea to kind of have them all flowing in the same direction. They don't all have to be scrolling out to the outside of the line. Some of them can go in, but it's just a good idea to have them all kind of going like it's one continuous vine going all the way around. And I just mentioned if you want to have some scrolls pointing inward to the inside of your heart template, that's a good idea too, just to mix it up a little bit. So in order to do that, like I just showed there for a second, you will want to bend the tail of your scroll back out again just to make it lay a little bit flatter. So here I'm going to show you again. I just sort of bend it in the opposite direction and then glue that bend, makes it sit real tight up against the heart shape. And the last little detail you can add into your heart is just some extra little tendrils that aren't curled at all, just to mix it up a little bit. I like to just add maybe 1/2 inch strips that are straight, and I just sort of just bend them really slightly and then slip them here and there between the scrolls just to make it look, it's like it's got a little bit something extra to it. I actually like even to go ahead and put 2 in some spots. I'm not going to overload them with these straight little feathery pieces, but I just think it, again, it adds something a little bit extra to it, makes it a little bit more natural. Once you are totally done with all of your tendrils and your scrolls and your flowers and everything is where you'd like it to be and everything is dry, you can go ahead and take out any pins that you have used at this point, and we're going to go ahead and remove your heart from the wax paper. And to do that, what I use is actually my needle tool, and I like to just slip it right underneath. You can see it's sort of sticking here and there because no matter how much you try, there's still going to be some glue. So I go ahead and I use my needle tool and I lay it flat against the wax paper and I just sort of wiggle it back and forth, and your quilling will come right off. Depending on what you're going to use your heart for, you may want to check the back and see if there's any big glue spots that you can get rid of. It's like I lost a couple flowers there, but that can easily be fixed later. What I actually do is I use my really tiny scissors and I try to just snip them if it looks like I'm going to be able to see them from the front, like right here on the side where my pinky is. You can see that there's one that's going right between a couple of scrolls. So I use these tiny scissors and just sort of snip the edge off of them. It's not super necessary, but it's just something I've gotten in the habit of doing. So this is really a great project for Mother's Day. You want to save it for Valentine's Day. The small size heart will fit right on a piece of 5x7 mat board, and that can be framed really easily. Or I'm also showing a pink one here that you can put on in front of a card. And this is just a very standard sized little note card, so you can see that fits really well there too. So the fun thing about this project is that you can really switch it up however you like. This is just a starting point. You can do more flowers, you can do completely different flowers, you can add some swirls to them to make different sorts of greenery that's coming off. You can do anything you think of with this. Again, this is just a starting point. But I thought it would be really fun to do this now, give you time to maybe make something for Mother's Day. It looks really nice in a frame, so just some stuff to think about. Go ahead and leave me a comment down below and tell me what you think, what your plans are to change it up a little bit, make it your own. I'd love to hear your plans. And as always, don't forget to like and subscribe, and I will see you next time. Bye-bye.